The notification came in at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of the most complicated reconciliation report I had touched in months. I work remotely as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized consulting firm based out of Chicago. My apartment is in Columbus, Ohio, a 2-bedroom place I chose specifically because it was quiet, because the building had a strict guest policy, and because it was 45 minutes away from my family's house. That last part is not a coincidence. I love my family. I also know exactly what they are capable of when they know where you live and you are too close to refuse them at the door. The reconciliation I was working on involved a manufacturing company that suspected one of their regional managers of skimming. My job was to go through 5 years of expense reports, flag the anomalies, and build a paper trail tight enough that a lawyer could walk into a courtroom with it. It required silence. It required focus. It required the kind of unbroken concentration that most people do not understand is an actual professional necessity, and not just a preference. My brother does not understand that. He has never understood that. He is 34 years old, 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he has moved through the world as though everyone in it exists to smooth the path in front of him. Growing up, I watched my parents excuse his dropped responsibilities and his borrowed money and his half-finished plans with a particular kind of exhausted love that I used to confuse for affection. It took me a long time to realize it was something else. It was easier to absorb the cost of him than to hold him accountable. He had learned that early, and he had never stopped counting on it. When he married his wife 4 years ago, I tried to be hopeful. She was sharp, well-spoken, seemed to have direction. What I did not know yet was that she and my brother were not going to balance each other out. They were going to amplify each other. Two people who both believed the world owed them something, sharing a mortgage and a joint bank account, and a constantly evolving list of people they could tap when the account ran low. I had been one of those people. I had lent my brother money 3 times in 2 years. The first time was $6,000 for what he described as a temporary cash flow problem with the small landscaping business he had started. He paid back $4,000 of it. The second time was $3,500 because his wife's car needed an engine replacement and they had no savings. He paid back none of it. The third time was $2,000 because they were behind on their mortgage, and he called me crying at 11 o'clock at night, and I was tired and sad, and I said yes before I thought it through. After the third time, I started keeping records. Not because I expected legal action. I just needed to see the reality of the situation in front of me without the fog of the moment. I needed something concrete I could look at when he called again, and my instinct was to say yes. I kept a folder on my desktop. Every text message, I screenshotted and saved with the date. Every voicemail, I recorded with a second phone and backed it up to cloud storage. Every email, I forwarded to a separate account I had created specifically for this purpose. I kept a running log in a plain text document with dates, amounts, what was said, and what was promised. My therapist, who I had been seeing for about a year at that point, told me that what I was doing was called documentation and that it was a healthy way to protect myself when I was in a relationship with someone whose behavior was unpredictable. I did not know yet how useful that folder was going to become. The notification on that Tuesday morning was a text from my brother. It said, "We're coming over today. Need to talk. It's important." I stared at it for a moment, then typed back, "I'm working. I have a deadline this week. Can we do a call this weekend?" He replied in under a minute, "This can't wait. We'll be there at noon." I called him. He did not pick up. I called his wife. She did not pick up either. I sent another text explaining that I was on a deadline with a client, that I could not have visitors this week, that whatever it was we could handle over the phone or over the weekend. I got no response. At 12:08, my doorbell rang. I have a video doorbell. I installed it about 18 months ago, partly out of general security awareness, and partly because I had started to feel, on an instinctive level, that I needed to know who was coming before I opened the door. The camera runs continuously and stores footage to a cloud account that is tied to my personal email. I checked the live feed from my laptop before I moved from my desk. It was my brother and his wife. She was standing with her arms crossed and her jaw set in the way that meant she had already decided how this conversation was going to go. He was looking at his phone. I pressed the intercom. I told you I was working. Open the door, he said. We drove 45 minutes. I told you not to come. I have a client deadline. This is more important than your deadline, his wife said. She said it the way she said most things, not loudly, but with a flatness that was designed to signal that the conversation was already over and you just hadn't received the memo yet. I let them in. I want to be honest about that. I let them in because I was raised to let family in, and because some part of me was still, at that point, hoping that whatever they wanted could be resolved in 20 minutes and I could get back to work. It could not be resolved in 20 minutes. They wanted money. Specifically, they wanted $15,000. My brother had been running his landscaping business for 3 years by then, and it had never become the thing he had described it would become. And they had taken out a small business loan the previous spring, and the repayment schedule was more than they could manage, and if they did not make the next payment in 10 days, they were going to default. He explained all of this quickly, leaning forward on my couch, his hands moving. His wife watched me while he talked. I listened. Then I said no. I said it calmly. I said I was sorry they were in this position, and that I hoped they could find a way through it, but that I was not in a position to lend $15,000, and that even if I had been, the money I had already lent and not gotten back made me unwilling to go further. The temperature in the room changed immediately. My brother said I was being selfish. His wife said it was interesting that I could afford my apartment and my vacations and my little forensic accounting career, but I couldn't help family. My brother said our parents were getting older, and I needed to think about what kind of person I wanted to be. His wife said I had always thought I was better than them. My brother said if this business went under, it would be partly my fault. I said again, no. They left 20 minutes later. His wife didn't say goodbye. My brother stopped in the doorway and looked at me for a moment and said, "You're going to regret this." I didn't know if he meant it as a threat or a prediction. I found out about 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I documented the visit. I wrote down everything I could remember from the conversation, time-stamped the entry, and added the screenshots of the texts he had sent that morning to the folder. I told myself I was being careful. I told my therapist the same thing when I brought it up at our next session. She agreed that I was being careful and said that was appropriate. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 5 days before a deliverable was due for a different client. It was my direct manager, a woman I genuinely respect and who had always treated me professionally. She asked if I had a few minutes for a quick check-in. I said of course. Her tone was careful in a way I recognized as the tone people use when they are about to say something they would rather not have to say. She told me that the firm had received a communication from someone claiming to be a family member. The communication alleged that I had been struggling with a substance use problem for the past several months, that my work had been declining as a result, and that I had become erratic and unreliable, and potentially a liability to the clients I was serving. She said the firm had an obligation to take communications like this seriously, even when they came from outside the organization. She said she wanted to give me a chance to speak before anything formal was initiated. I asked who had sent the communication. She said it had come by email, and that the sender had identified himself as my brother. I was quiet for a moment. Not because I was surprised, not really, but because hearing it said out loud that he had actually done it landed differently than I expected it to. I told her I was glad she called me directly. I told her that what my brother had alleged was not true. I told her that I had been keeping records of his pattern of behavior toward me over the past 2 years, including the visit to my apartment 3 weeks prior and the financial requests that had preceded it, and that I believed the communication to her was retaliation for my refusal to lend him money. I told her I could have documentation to her within the hour. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Send me everything." I spent the next 40 minutes pulling the folder together. I compiled the text message screenshots in chronological order. I wrote a clear, factual summary of the 3 loans, with dates and amounts. I attached the text from the morning of his visit, the log entry I had written after they left, and a note from my therapist which she had previously offered me in writing, for my own records confirming that I had been attending regular sessions and that there were no clinical concerns about my functioning. I sent it all in a single organized email with a subject line that said, "Documentation regarding contact from my brother." I went back to work. 2 days later, my manager called again. She said the firm had reviewed the documentation I submitted and consulted briefly with their legal team. She said the communication from my brother was being categorized as a bad faith complaint and would be noted in my file as such. She said my employment status was unaffected and that she was sorry I was dealing with this. She also said, gently, that the firm's legal team had flagged something in the documentation I had submitted. In one of the text threads I had included, from about 8 months prior, my brother had asked me to co-sign a loan document for him. I had refused by text. He had said he understood. What the legal team noticed was that the loan my brother and his wife had taken out, the one he had come to my apartment to ask me to help repay, had a co-signer listed on the original paperwork. And the name listed as co-signer was mine. I had never signed that document. I did not know how to hold what I was being told. I sat in my desk chair and looked at my window and felt something that was not quite shock and not quite calm. My name on a loan I had never agreed to. My brother, who had sat on my couch 3 weeks ago, asking me to help him pay back money that had apparently been borrowed in part using my credit, without my knowledge. My manager gave me the name of the firm's outside legal counsel and said I should consider reaching out to them directly. She said the firm was not involved in whatever I chose to do next, but that they would cooperate if any legal process required documentation from them. I called my own attorney that afternoon. She is a woman I had worked with 2 years ago on an unrelated matter involving a lease dispute, and I had kept her number because she was straightforward and did not use more words than she needed to. I explained the situation. She asked me to send everything. I did. Within a week, she had confirmed what the firm's legal team had suspected. My brother's loan application contained a co-signer signature page with my name on it. The signature was not mine. She said this constituted fraud, specifically identity fraud and forgery, and that I had standing to pursue both civil and criminal remedies. I want to be honest about how I felt at this point, because it was not triumphant. It was not the clean satisfaction I think people expect when a story like this turns the corner. It was grief, mostly. The kind that comes when you stop hoping that someone you love is going to be different from what they are. My brother had forged my signature. He had borrowed money against my credit, without my knowledge, and then come to my apartment to ask me to help pay it back. When I said no, he had tried to have me fired. I cried about it. I talked to my therapist about it, and then I let my attorney do her job. What happened next moved faster than I expected. A formal complaint was filed. The lender was notified. My brother received a legal notice. His wife called me twice. I did not answer. My mother called me crying, saying that my brother was her son and that I was destroying the family over money. I listened to her. I told her I loved her. I told her that her son had committed fraud using my name and had then attempted to damage my career when I wouldn't bail him out. I told her I was not going to pretend that had not happened. She called me a few more times that week. I answered each time. I tried to be patient. I understood she was in pain and that her pain was real, even if the situation she was describing me as the person causing harm was not accurate. My father did not call. He texted me one evening, a short message that said, "I looked at what you sent your mother. I'm sorry this happened to you. I love you." I read that text probably 6 times. My brother and his wife retained an attorney. For several weeks, through the legal process, I had no direct contact with either of them. My attorney handled everything. The case did not go to criminal trial. He agreed to a settlement that included repayment of the full loan balance in my name, a written acknowledgement of the forgery, and certain conditions regarding future conduct. I am not going to detail every element of it because some of it is still subject to a confidentiality agreement. What I can say is that my credit was protected, the loan was resolved, and my name came off the document. What I can also say is that the folder I had started keeping 18 months earlier, the one my therapist called documentation, and I called self-protection, is the reason any of it worked. If I had not kept records, I would have been standing in front of my manager with nothing but my word against my brother's. If I had not screenshotted those texts, the timeline of harassment before his HR complaint would have been invisible. If I had not written down what was said during that visit to my apartment, I would have had no contemporaneous account of the confrontation that preceded everything that followed. He counted on me having nothing. He counted on the family habit, the one where it is easier to absorb the cost of him than to hold him accountable, being the only record that existed. It took me a long time to understand that keeping records was not a betrayal of my family. It was not suspicious or paranoid or an indication that something was wrong with me. It was the thing that made it possible for me to tell the truth when I needed to, with evidence behind me, in a way that could not be dismissed. I still live in Columbus. My apartment is still quiet. I still have the video doorbell and the cloud backup and the folder, though it has not needed any new entries in quite some time. I speak to my father regularly. My relationship with my mother is slow and careful and better than it was in the months right after everything came out. She does not ask me to apologize for what I did, which is progress. I do not ask her to fully understand it, which is my concession in return. My brother and I have had 2 conversations since the settlement. Both were brief and stiff in the way that conversations are when the people having them are still deciding what the relationship actually is now. I don't know where it lands. I know I am not going to spend the years I have ahead of me waiting for an apology that may never come. I know I am not going to pretend the story is different from what it is. And I know that somewhere on my desktop, in a folder that I hope I never need to open again, there is a complete and time-stamped record of exactly what happened and in what order. That record is mine. It is the truest version of events. And it exists because I decided, a long time before any of this came to a head, that I was worth the effort of protecting. I keep getting messages from people who have watched this and told me their own versions of this story. Different names, different details, same shape underneath. A sibling who borrowed and borrowed until they resented you for the borrowing. A family member who turned people against you when you finally said no. Someone who decided that your refusal was an attack and responded accordingly. What I want to say to every person who recognizes something in what I have described is this: document everything. Not because you are planning a legal case, not because you want to go to war, but because when you are standing in a room trying to explain what has happened to you, having the truth written down and dated and backed up means that the truth cannot be taken from you by someone who is better at telling a story than you are. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say no, and you are allowed to have proof. Those things are not the same as being the villain of someone else's narrative. Even when someone very loudly and very publicly insists that they are.